To observe a modern Goth festival is to witness a highly codified visual language, an aesthetic ecosystem defined by uncompromising contrasts. It is a world of flowing velvet and intricate corsets clashing violently against neon cyber dreadlocks and heavy combat boots. Mainstream society routinely struggles to process this much intentional darkness. The assumption is often that dressing in solid black and obsessing over the macabre must be the physical symptom of a psychological pathology, reducing participants to either chronically depressed teenagers or dangerous antisocial rebels. That stereotype calcified into an international moral panic in April 1999. In the chaotic aftermath of the Columbine High School massacre, news outlets prioritized a sensationalist narrative over accurate reporting. Because the shooters wore black trench coats, the media incorrectly identified them as Goths, fabricating a lone psychotrope that tied a pacifist, art-focused community to extreme violence. But there is a massive historical contradiction sitting at the center of this identity. The word Goth did not originate in an underground 1980s nightclub. It originally defined a sophisticated, heavily armed military confederation that marched across Europe and shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. Connecting an ancient warring civilization to a modern subculture of artists and introverts requires untangling a sprawling 2,000-year game of linguistic telephone. To trace the first major semantic mutation, we have to look at the map of late antiquity. The ancient Goths were a complex Germanic civilization. As geopolitical pressures mounted, they reorganized into two primary entities, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, migrating directly toward the contested frontiers of the Roman Empire. After years of exploitation by provincial authorities, the Visigoths rebelled. In August 410 AD, King Alaric achieved the unthinkable, the sack of Rome. It sent a psychological shockwave across the Mediterranean, signaling the irreversible decline of the Roman Empire. The physical tribes eventually assimilated completely into the local populations of Europe and vanished as a distinct ethnic group. But during the 16th century Renaissance, European intellectuals initiated an ideological crusade. They obsessively idolized the mathematical symmetry of classical Greece and Rome, and they required a historical scapegoat to blame for the perceived darkness of the Middle Ages. Italian architect Giorgio Vasari provided that scapegoat. He viewed the medieval architecture of northern France, with its pointed arches and organic forms, as monstrous and barbarous. Operating under a severe historical misconception, Vasari incorrectly blamed the ancient Germanic tribes for destroying Roman buildings and replacing them with this unrefined style. In 1550, he officially labeled the architecture Gothic. Vasari's immense influence successfully divorced the word from the actual Germanic people. It became an enduring linguistic tool for castigating anything that lacked the geometric purity and restraint of classical Roman culture. In the late 18th century, the cultural pendulum swung back. The Enlightenment prioritized pure scientific rationality, but the proponents of the Romantic movement pushed back, arguing that cold logic failed to account for the chaotic, emotional spectrum of the human experience. English author Horace Walpole formally birthed the Gothic literary genre in 1764. He published a novel featuring supernatural dread and decaying castles, purposefully subtitling it A Gothic Story. He was directly referencing the eerie, medieval-inspired architecture of his own physical estate, Strawberry Hill. The genre expanded far beyond decaying buildings. American authors like Edgar Allan Poe internalized the atmosphere of those medieval cathedrals, the looming shadows and the heavy focus on mortality, using the aesthetic to explore human depravity and profound psychological terror. This visual and philosophical lineage finally met its musical match in late 1970s Britain. A subset of musicians began rejecting the outward-facing political rage of punk rock. They slowed the tempo and introduced complex electronics to create a more introspective, atmospheric genre known as Postpunk. The definitive catalyst arrived in 1979 when the band Bauhaus released Bela Lugosi's Dead. Driven by a foreboding bass line and the cavernous, theatrical vocals of Peter Murphy, the track depicted the funeral of the actor who played Dracula. It provided a sonic and visual blueprint that dozens of bands would follow. the emotional darkness championed by the Romantics had finally found a dedicated soundtrack. With this single post-punk music release, the word goth transitioned from a literary adjective into a vibrant, chosen youth subculture. Goth became a global identity because its core focus, the exploration of emotions like melancholy and romanticism, allows it to merge with regional histories. In Germany, the scene synthesized with 19th century dark romanticism. In Japan, it adopted the theatricality of Rococo fashion. And in Mexico, it fused with indigenous observances like the Day of the Dead. This chart visualizes data from a 2015 clinical study on adolescence and mental health. At first glance, it seems to confirm mainstream fears. Nearly 69% of teenagers who identify strongly as Goth report a history of depression, compared to fewer than 10% in the non-Goth control group. But the researchers emphasized a critical selection effect. Participation in the subculture does not cause depression. Instead, the scene naturally attracts young people who are already highly sensitive or have experienced trauma in traditional social hierarchies, offering them a space where they don't have to hide their emotional struggles. Within this non-judgmental community, members transform their feelings of alienation into creative outlets. Psychological studies of adult Goths show that this active participation promotes significant resilience, allowing individuals to find meaning in painful experiences rather than succumbing. Ultimately, the history of the word mirrors the resilience of the people who wear it. Choosing to find beauty in the shadows and dwell intellectually upon mortality is not a threat to the social order. It is a necessary acknowledgement of the complete human experience.